Thank you very much for taking the time. I invited you because you're one of my friends and you're also one of the people who thinks a lot about education and what we could do better in our educational system. Maybe you want to talk a bit about what drove you into the direction of going into education.
Mm, I think that has to be one of those explanations where um, you try to come up with a reason afterwards in hindsight, and you can't actually know if that's the real reason. Um, but I mean, education growing up has been an important aspect of my life, just by virtue of spending many hours in school and then attending university. So I think it's quite natural to spend quite a bit of time thinking about it. And I think for me personally, I wouldn't say I was a huge misfit, but oftentimes I had my problems in school, certain disciplinary actions being taken, and sometimes I had very bad grades because I thought certain subjects were just incredibly dull and boring and taught poorly. So I think the combination of being dissatisfied on the one hand and just spending a lot of time with it on the other could have been one of the main causes.
I mean, you're now going into the direction of math. I mean, you published papers in machine learning.
I haven't published,
Oh,
trying to publish.
you're trying to
I've
publish
submitted.
exactly as I do. Um, what was your best math course in school or university, and why was it so good? I mean, what drove you into becoming a math guy?
Mhm. So I originally studied economics, and I wanted to do climate econ to help to save the environment. And I looked at the cool research that was going on internationally in the field, and many professors in the United States, who I think published some of the most interesting research, have strong backgrounds in mathematics. So during COVID, I remember sitting at home and the new semester had just started, and I thought to myself, why should I not just sign up for a few math classes and see what it's like? Because I don't have a lot to lose. I can just watch the recordings and see what happens. And then I took an introductory class, linear algebra one, which I think most engineers and maybe economists take as well, just like maybe less proof oriented, proof based. And it was incredible because, I mean, for one, linear algebra, I think is super interesting and super important for many subjects that you are going to use in computer science, economics, everywhere. And two, just like being exposed to the like proof-oriented way of thinking was incredibly interesting and enriching.
And that's interesting that you say that because I think most people I talk to who take linear algebra one, they shy away from it immediately. They say this is not the thing I want to do forever. This is definitely something that I want to just pass and then drop out, do something else, do economics, estimate models. So do you think it was just like personal preference that kept you in the direction?
Mm, I think the reason I enjoyed linear algebra so much is that we really took the time to properly understand it. And for me, that took forever. Um, and I don't think I would have liked it as much if it had been in a more let's get through this rather fast and then move on sort of way. I think that's what made it so interesting.
That's for me also like when I teach them, one of the major things to get these aha moments from people and to real because I mean you really release dopamine in your brain if you have these aha understanding moments. So that's what I something that I try to foster in students. I mean, right now you started becoming a sort of teacher yourself. And I know that your approach is also very much based on dopamine and these aha moments. Maybe you can start talking about what you started with your company and how you try to incorporate those math aha moments in that.
Mhm. Yeah, so I'm currently together with my co-founder working on an app. It's currently called Sophia. And our one sentence description that we always give is we're building TikTok, but for learning mathematics. And the way we approach it is that one, we think it's incredibly important to get very good at like personalized math education on a large scale, like making it accessible. And then we sat down and started thinking, what are the best tools that we have on our hands to get children engaged in certain things on a phone? And then immediately what comes to mind are, on the one hand, like computer games or like mobile games. And then secondly, and I think that works much even better, social media apps like TikToks that have just figured out these ways of like triggering certain dopamine or whatever receptors in your brain and kind of getting you hooked, getting you addicted, and taking up your attention. So we thought, what if we could use these very powerful mechanisms, but instead of using them to keep children scrolling through some dance or cat or whatever videos, we can use it to keep them motivated to learn mathematics. So that's how we started. And basically the app that we're currently working on, which is already out on the app in the Play Store, is that you swipe through animated short videos that explain certain concepts in mathematics. And then in between the videos, you have exercises that you can solve. And then the idea, what we're working towards, is you just start swiping. And the way TikTok kind of shows you videos it thinks you might find funny or entertaining, we will show you videos that we think are going to be helpful for you. And that way we try to have like a very personalized math learning experience, accessible on any phone, anywhere on the planet.
And if I can stop you there, I mean, the big difference between your app and your experience in the classroom is that the app is personalized and the classroom is not. And that has, what you've told me, a big influence on inequality. So maybe you always talk about two sigma problem. Maybe you can explain what that is.
So there was an educational psychologist in, I believe, the 1980s, Bloom, and he conducted a study where he wanted to find out what are the determinants of educational success. And he tested different scenarios, and like the most famous comparison was between one-on-one instruction and classroom instruction. So one-on-one instruction is just a kid and a teacher trying to learn mathematics. And then the classroom setting is just normal school setting. And he found that if you evaluate the learning success and compare the one-on-one private tutoring scenario to the classroom instruction scenario, the difference in performance is 2 standard deviations. That's a huge difference for those whose statistics classes are not as present anymore. In that particular case, it meant that I believe the median student in the private tutoring class would have been in the best 2% in the classroom instruction case. And one thing to take away from that is that personalization is super important in education. And if you look at the reality, what's out there, and what are strong determinants of educational success, it's mainly where you went to school and who your parents are. And I think part of that can be traced back to the degree of personalized instruction, because if, for example, both of your parents are academics, chances are they're going to spend 1 or 2 hours with you in the afternoon going over the homework. Or if you go to private school, you have much smaller class sizes, which allows for a much higher degree of personalized instruction. So we're thinking, if we can do that on an app, what if that could enable anyone or everyone to have like a personalized learning experience?
I mean, the big thing that I like about the idea of putting that in an app is that you can actually pool resources from teachers. And I mean, on that app, you can instruct probably 100,000, maybe 1 million, probably even more people. But you can also use the resources of thousands of teachers to teach a good course. Because right now, I think it's very sad that what I'm specializing in, and probably what you're specializing on, very much dependent on where your good teachers or professors were. So I had a very good teacher in financial economics. So that's my research topic right now, because that's where I just know a lot, because he was a great teacher. But I'm not able to do theoretical econometrics just because I had a bad professor. And I really don't understand why we have bad econometrics courses if there are, I don't know, 10, 20, 30,000 econometrics teachers on this world. and why they just can't pull those resources together.
It's very interesting that you say that. I remember I once took a class at my university and I thought it was poorly taught. So I looked for online lectures on the same topic. And then I went to the exam having only visited like 2 lectures at my university, but having taken the entire online course. It was a great experience. So yeah, I believe that's a great point. Another thing that we believe holds a lot of potential is that not only can we pool like teaching resources and have a lot of teachers work on like creating the best possible material, we can also create feedback on the material very well. Like if we have data and we can see that one video just like does not contribute to learning success at all, we know we can get rid of that video. And then we can always make slight improvements and see how it affects the success of the students. And that way you have like a very tight feedback loop on the instruction, which I think is always very hard to get. Like I remember at the end of each term when we have teaching evaluation at universities, professors beg us to fill out the forms. But then very few people do it. It's only like once per semester. And also, I don't think that like forms that are filled in by students are necessarily the best metric for teaching success. So I think
Absolutely
that's
not.
another.
I got a lot of, I mean, I've taught numerous courses now. I got a lot of those feedback forms. I get a lot of feedback on YouTube. And I mean, I've also thought a lot about education, and I just know a lot of the feedback is just bad advice. One thing that, for instance, is in part of my teaching philosophy is that I want to teach people to really think. And because in university and also in school, we're often trained to just like memorize stuff and then spit it out. And you see that in people. I just recently talked to one person who's a politician, and he has studied economics, and he does not understand anything about economics. You can see it, you can hear it from his arguments. And that's, I think, a big failure of our education system, that we just don't teach people to think. We teach people to memorize. And so it's interesting that you say that, because I think that's one of the big determinants of success in math apps. Or do you think like, how do you think about what makes a success in your app?
So you're saying teaching children to think instead of to just reproduce certain patterns.
Yes, definitely.
That's a very difficult question. If I'm honest, I think that's something that's very hard to quantify. Like, what does it mean for someone to actually think on their own feet? And if I have math problems, like you can only go so far in high school. So there's always the possibility that
True.
students mainly memorize. Um, so I think maybe there will be a potential in the future to evaluate whether or not students are actually able to think on their feet. And I think like probably the typical example would be, do their skills generalize? Like what if we show them something that they should be capable of solving, but they have to come up with like a new idea? So that's something to be implemented. But in general, I think it's a super hard challenge, no matter where you are,
I mean,
to
it's
teach
really
students to actually think.
it's really something that I thought about. I mean, I will teach a new course next semester, and I want to do that. I want to teach people to think, and my main method of doing that would be to ask big economics questions. For instance, what is the optimal debt level for the US government? And I will probably just ask them to write a page or two on that. And I know that 80% of students will go to ChatGPT, type that question in, and give me the page. And so I have not solved that problem yet. I have not come up with a better assignment where I can really force people to think.
Mhm. I, for some time, took classes at a German online university in psychology, and they made us read a paper where they compared internal, external, and intrinsic motivation. And the
Okay.
three terms mean external motivation is your force to do something, like your mom tells
Yeah.
you, if you don't study, you will be in trouble. Internal motivation is you force yourself. So it's like, I want to get good grades, so I'm going to study. And then intrinsic motivation means you're motivated because you actually enjoy doing the thing. Like, I want to learn more about this. It interests me. And in the study, they showed that learning outcomes were much better if you studied out of intrinsic motivation. And maybe that's also the key to getting people to think for themselves. Because if you just force them to study certain things, for example, by administering tests, they're probably going to optimize for the test. But then if you can spark their curiosity, that might be what gets them to start thinking on their feet. And maybe asking them to just like write a paper, one page about a certain question can be the perfect way to achieve that, or one good way to achieve that.
Maybe that's actually a good point to end, because I will show a screenshot of your app, because I think you do a great job at sparking curiosity. I've seen your intro to linear functions, and I really love the way that you introduce that topic.
Here are 3 situations that can be modeled with linear functions. 1. You're ordering burgers with your friends and you're figuring out how much you will have to spend depending on how many burgers you're ordering. 2. You've got a job working as a lifeguard with a fixed hourly salary and you want to determine how much money you'll receive for your work. 3. You're going to a sports game and in addition to the ticket price, you have to pay for each drink you're getting. In this chapter, you will learn how to model situations like these using linear functions.
So thank you very much, and see you.
Thanks for having me.